Well, it is my honor today to welcome back to the Daily Signal podcast Dr. Carol Swain. She's an award winning author, an award winning political scientist, a former professor at both Princeton and Vanderbilt, and a lifetime member at the James Madison Society. Dr. Carol Swain, thank you so much for being with us today.
It is always great to do something with the Heritage Foundation. And so I'm excited about an opportunity to talk with you today and your viewers.
Yes, well, it's really, really special to have you back on and on today on June 19th or Juneteenth, as it's been come to be known. If we go all the way back to June 19th, 1865, that was a very significant day. Explain what happened on June 19th, 1865, if you would, Dr. Swain.
Well, that was the day uh, that slaves in Galveston, Texas, learned that they had been set free. And this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln.
Wow. And so, I mean, just a marker of really that was the transition, right? When all of a sudden, even after the Civil War has been over, but this significant day where now every enslaved person now knows
Well,
I
we
am
hope that
free.
every slave learned that they had been set free. Anyone that was dependent on their slave owners to inform them of the latest news, may have endured slavery much longer.
We saw just several years ago, obviously, Juneteenth be made a federal holiday, but was Juneteenth celebrated even before it was made a federal holiday?
Well, if you Google, it says that it was. I actually was not aware of it being, this big deal until, when it became a big deal after George Floyd's death.
Mm.
And I noticed in my research about Juneteenth that the NAACP has tried since 2014 to get the Emancipation Proclamation uh, that recognized as a federal holiday, and
Oh.
they wanted January 1st to be the federal holiday for Lincoln's freeing of the slaves, which I would say is more significant in that for most people in the nation who had been enslaved in the South or anywhere else that they were slaves, they got their freedom on. They got their freedom when Lincoln signed the proclamation.
Mhm.
So the people that did not hear about it until 2.5 years later, this is a smaller group of people. That's a subset. So it's interesting to me that even though the NAACP was pushing for one particular date for a holiday that I would say would have been more significant, uh, the Juneteenth became a national holiday because of the politics surrounding George Floyd's death.
That is fascinating. Is there still a push and a movement to get that federal holiday in recognition of the Emancipation Proclamation?
I don't know, but the resolution is still out there on the
Mm.
NAACP's website.
Interesting.
I think it
Very
would make
fascinating.
sense to combine both of those um, significant events, to combine them into one holiday. And maybe that's something President Trump can accomplish during his next term. The other thing that fascinated me doing this research is that President Trump was the first person who said that he would like to make Juneteenth a federal holiday for Black Americans. And so that was part of his 2020 Platinum Plan. And it is something that he would have done. Joe Biden just seized or he plagiarized Trump's idea.
How do you think that Americans should celebrate Juneteenth? How are you going to celebrate?
I'm going to be speaking about it. I'm working my way through it uh, because to me it's new, and anything that comes out of politics that I have a little bit of trouble with the politics that surrounded George Floyd's death, how it was exploited by various groups. And so for Juneteenth, I think that we should recognize that the Proclamation signed by Abraham Lincoln was even more significant for freeing blacks, across the country, and that we should recognize that is more significant. It is not a federal holiday, and if there's going to be a push, then activists should push to combine the 2 days. So, me, I'm going to celebrate it by being the activist, telling people if you really want to celebrate, the most significant event, then you need to be celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation rather than Juneteenth, that somehow became very politicized. And it was something that was important to enough Black people that President Trump was the first person who said he would make it a federal holiday. Joe Biden, beat him to the punch by signing the legislation. So there's a lot of politics involved. And at the end of the day, it's about getting Black support for Democrats or Republicans.
So maybe a great way to celebrate Juneteenth is to pull out the Emancipation Proclamation, read through it with your family, with your kids, which leads me to the question of history. There's so much debate over how we interpret American history. I'm curious what your favorite sources are for history as the American people want to, maybe on Juneteenth or in this season during summer with their kids, maybe want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into US history. What are the sources that you go to?
I go to original documents. And one of the things that my nonprofit is doing this summer on June 28th, we are doing a constitutional camp for middle school children. And as part of that, we're having experts come in. Um, our experts are school teachers, and I would do some of the talking. We have a representative from the American Journey Project that was started by Glenn Beck. They will have artifacts the children can handle that come from that era. So I think that it's important always to go to the original documents. And I love your idea about celebrating Juneteenth by pulling out the Emancipation Proclamation. It was not that long, and reading that original document, and also reading some documents, some of Lincoln's speeches, some of the speeches of people who were in opposition to freeing the slaves, and just really make it about learning. It shouldn't just be about hot dogs and whatever fireworks. It needs to be about education. And the only way we can educate ourselves about history is to go to the original source documents. And so if people who care about America, if they have not read the Declaration of Independence, if they have not, made their way through the short Constitution, if they don't know the Bill of Rights, it would be a great time to really dig into these documents that help make America great.
So practical. Well, you are so passionate about education. This is a topic that, of course, has been an integral part of your own journey, your own life, your own career as a professor. And as you mentioned, you have this new initiative of really promoting strong education. When you look at our school system today, all the way from our elementary education all the way through college, how are we doing in America?
Well, the public schools are failing, and so are many of the private schools. And I have turned a lot of my efforts this year to supporting classical Christian schools. I've spoken at numerous fundraisers for academies, also some Catholic schools, because Catholic schools do an excellent job of educating children, not just Catholic children, but all children. Uh, African American boys do especially well in Catholic schools. And so I'm really focused on K through 12 education. I will always be fighting for higher education because I've spent, 30 years as a professor before I retired. So I care about higher education, but I believe that the K through 12 educational environment is toxic. And for parents who can't homeschool, they need to have an alternative to the public schools. At the same time, I support public schools. I have a grandson that's in public schools. I'm working to get him out of public schools to put him in a Catholic school because I believe he would get a better education. But many of the private schools, the Christian schools, have been infiltrated with diversity, equity, and inclusion and ideas that we associate with Marxism and
Mm.
the LGBTQ agenda. It's worked its way even into some of the private academies. Some of the Christian schools don't have strong positions about uh, the differences between males and females that's based on science, not based on religion, based on science. So there's a critical situation that our children face, and it's an all hands on deck moment for Americans who care about education. I care about education. I will fight for public schools because other people's children are trapped there. But if I can have my way, my great grandchildren will not be trapped in any of the public schools I see today.
What do diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or critical race theory, what effect do those things have on the psychology of young people?
Well, I can tell you that critical race theory, and I have two books that are relevant to this. Black Eye for America um, is one that was written for parents to educate them about critical race theory and how it was impacting education. It's all about shaming white children, and it accuses the white race of being oppressors. It says that every minority is a victim. I don't want my great grandchildren or anyone's children to see themselves as a victim. And it also puts the burden on white people for addressing racism and all the problems that minority communities face. The responsibility for helping yourself has been removed from them. It's been laid at the feet of white people. White people are supposed to solve the crime problem, the unwed motherhood issue, the housing problems, the drug problems, all the murder problems, all of these things. And it's not productive for Black people. And I would like to see that changed. But the most serious thing that happens for young children is that they're being exposed to adult ideas that they shouldn't be exposed to. And that's through critical race theory more than diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, we see what that mostly at the college level,
Mhm.
but also in some private academies. And that's very focused on group identities, on the equity notion that we should have equal outcomes. It pushes the ideas associated with something like math being racist. And if racial and ethnic minorities believe math is racist and they approach it in a non traditional way, it's more likely than not that they will end up not having the kind of skills they need to be successful in most of the fields in America. And then the inclusion that's being pushed, it's not the same as integration. Like in my era, um, and when I say my era, I'm thinking when I was a child, the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed. It was about non discrimination, equal opportunity, and integration. There was outreach for racial and ethnic minorities. There were open doors, but people had to work hard and prove themselves. I believe that was a better system. It allowed people like me to overcome poverty and to become successful. And I would rather have an environment that comports with our laws, our civil rights laws, and our equal opportunity laws that bans discrimination, whether it's against whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, uh, heterosexuals, homosexuals. It bans discrimination, period. It opens doors of equal opportunity by making people aware of opportunities, and those that need a helping hand, give them a helping hand, but don't guarantee the outcomes, don't lower the standards. And then with inclusion, I believe in individualism. I don't believe that we should be focused on including people just because they belong to a group. When people are integrated into an environment, they become part of the whole, and we should be working forward working on unity, bringing people together across racial, ethnic, political lines within job places. The focus should be on the mission of the organization, not on pushing social justice agendas. And unfortunately, that's what we have descended to in America, that we have people that are pushing agendas.
Well, and you spent, as you said, 30 years in the belly of the beast in higher education. Are you optimistic for the future of our colleges and universities across America when right now, I mean, we think about what we've just seen in the past several months with so many pro-Palestine protests and so many protests on our college campuses just a few years after we saw so many race-driven protests. What are we going to see at our universities in the next 5 to 10 years? Can there be a real shift and a real change?
I believe a real shift and change is taking place now.
Hmm.
And I have connections with colleges and universities as well as with young people. And young people are pushing back. They really want to be exposed to ideas. And during the era when I got my education, that was mostly during the 1980s, I would say that universities were closer to being a marketplace of ideas. Like I was exposed to conservative professors, liberal professors, and I took those ideas and I became the person I am today. But I had to grapple with literature and grapple with ideas that made me feel uncomfortable, that were foreign to me. I believe that's how education takes place, that it creates critical thinking skills. And we see progress because many corporations are moving away from diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and we also see that with colleges and universities, even Harvard now has decided that they will no longer require uh, job applicants to write mandatory DEI statements where they have to convince the the search committee that they are going to advance, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those statements, many of them were contrived. They had specialists telling people how to write the statements, what the search committee was looking for. They became meaningless, but it was also a way to weed out conservatives. Well, those have been jettisoned. And I believe that higher education, to survive, they have to become more balanced. And colleges, universities are making statements or making decisions that they will try. This is going to be difficult for them, but they will try to stay out of political issues. So we are making progress. And I believe that more and more colleges and universities are going to decide to return to some semblance of being a marketplace of ideas, and you will see the conservative ranks grow because they have to do that to be able to attract students, and for parents and the people that fund universities, for them to be willing to pour their money into the educational enterprise. It has to be an educational enterprise and not an indoctrination center.
We recently had Dr. Bob Woodson on the show, and he said something very similar. So I'm encouraged to hear that you both are saying, actually, I think we're seeing a really positive shift here and we're moving in the right direction.
And I like to think that I was a part of that, and I want to pitch, my latest book here,
Please do. Let's hear it.
uh, the adversity of diversity, and it's how the Supreme Court's decision to remove race from college admissions criteria will doom diversity programs. And so this was published last summer, after the Supreme Court decision. And at that time, a lot of people didn't understand DEI, and there was this argument that institutions would become lily white. That's not true. And it's even racist to make that argument. We can have integration without discrimination. And I argue in this book, The Adversity of Diversity, that DEI programs, whether they're in the corporate world or in higher education, that they're doomed because they violate the Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause in the same way as race based college admissions. So it's an argument that I've been making for a long time. I was very excited when the Supreme Court took up the Harvard and North Carolina cases. I anticipated the outcome, and I see us making progress. And I think DEI is doomed. Of course, the people will fight back because it's a cottage industry. But in some states, such as Florida and Texas, the legislature has taken steps to eliminate those programs in higher education. And so they can't just remake themselves and continue doing the same thing under a different name. I think that many of the resources that we're putting into DEI programs would be best used to help recruit students, to offer remedial classes, and to pour into the K through 12 educational environment. Like colleges and universities, if they want more racial and ethnic minorities, then they need to invest in K through 12 education. We're talking about millions of dollars that are being poured into DEI. It's supporting this huge bureaucracy within the college environment. It's very costly, and there's no value. There's no evidence that students are happier when they have tons of DEI officers than they would have been if these people didn't exist. And it also takes away resources that would be used for academic courses.
Dr. Swain, how can our listeners buy that book and all your other books? How can they follow your work?
Well, I'm everywhere. I'm on X as Carol M. Swain. I'm on Getter, Facebook, and my website. I have two: B bethepeoplenews.com, where I post many of my interviews as well as op-ed pieces, and there's a book link. And then carolemswain.com, there's a book link as well. And if you order from the website, there's a Christian bookstore that fulfills
Mm.
those orders. But my books are on sale everywhere. And Black Eye for America: How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, that has been my best-selling book. And it has over 800 reviews on Amazon. That's a lot of reviews.
That's a lot of reviews. Well, it is always a joy and a pleasure, Dr. Carol Swain, to talk with you. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.